The reason I've used this title, Begetting of Wisdom, because there's a book, an Australian book written back in 1910 called Begetting of Wisdom. It was written by Henry Handel Richardson, and it's set in a private girls' school in Melbourne in the 1880s. The author's real name, though, was Ethel Florence Lindsay Richardson, and the inspiration for the book came from her time at the Presbyterian Ladies' College in Melbourne from the ages of 7 through to 12, from the ages of 12 through to 17, and she was a boarder and a student at the school. But the very first words in the book are, "Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding." And that's chapter 4, verse 7 of the book of Proverbs. That's the King James translation. The NIV translation in contemporary English is, "The beginning of wisdom is this, get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding." I remember quite clearly when I was in about year 8 or 9, my parents decided that I needed to get a bit of understanding and wisdom, and especially in writing essays. So I found myself getting some. The tutor's name, I'm fairly certain, was Mrs. Fiona Butterfield, and she lived just down the road here in Bavaria Street, and she was an English history teacher at one of our local high schools. And in essence, she drummed into me that when you're writing an essay, start off by saying what you're going to say. Then say it, and finish off by saying that you've said it. Now, I use this principle in putting this message together this morning. And this principle also describes our Bible reading, which have a very opening verses to the book of Proverbs, chapter 1, verses 1 to 6, which Josh has just read to us. And the Proverbs of a king of Solomon, written for the purpose of, in verse 2, gaining wisdom and instruction for understanding words of insight. Verse 3, for receiving instruction in prudent behaviour, for doing what is right and just and fair. Verse 4, for giving prudence to those who are simple, for giving knowledge and discretion to the young. And verse 5, let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. And verse 6, for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. And that sounds suspiciously like, begin by saying what you're going to say. And it agrees with the opening words of that book, The Getting of Wisdom. The beginning of wisdom is this, get wisdom, though it cost all you have, get understanding. Which is, of course, from Proverbs anyway. And so this morning, I'm talking about, firstly, the book of Proverbs in context. Firstly, who wrote it? Where was it written? And where does it fit into the Old Testament? What is the purpose of the book? And then crucially, what is wisdom? And then looking at the relevance for today. So let's look at the Proverbs in context. Firstly, who wrote it? The book of Proverbs has 31 chapters, the majority of which were written by King Solomon, the son of David. We've already heard of this. Contributing chapters 1 through to chapter 22 and chapters 25 to 29. And we can also be fairly certain that Solomon also contributed the words of the wise in chapters 22, verses 17 through to chapter 24. A man named Agar, the son of Yake, contributed chapter 30. We don't know anything more about him. Anything else is pure conjecture. King Lemuel contributed chapter 31. Again, Who's King Lemuel? Some say he's actually Solomon, using Lemuel as a pen name. Others say he could be King Hezekiah of Judah, while others say he could have been a foreign king recording the wisdom of his Israelite mother. Again, it's all pure conjecture. Now, when was Proverbs written? The Proverbs written by Solomon up to chapter 24 were all compiled between 970 and 930 BC. Chapters 25 through to 29 were collected from the wisdom of Solomon around 720 BC. And a reasonable date for completing the whole of a book is arguably about 700 BC. And if you want a specific date, well, let's go for 686 BC. However, if you want to be pedantic, and without falling back on dates prefixed with maybe or perhaps or about or possibly or arguably, Proverbs as we know it today was certainly in existence no later than 200 BC. And that's a spread of some 500 years as to the date the book of Proverbs could have been completed. And you could say that's falls under the sitting on the fence category, which is a bit of ouch. And ouch, because the contributions of Agur and King Lemuel are just impossible to pin any reliable date to. But Proverbs is not about when it was written, is it? Proverbs is about wisdom, and wisdom that's not affected by time. So where does Proverbs sit in the Old Testament? The Jewish Tanakh has 24 books in 3 basic sections. There's the Torah, which is the law, the Nevi'im, which are the prophets and historical books, and the Ketuvim, the wisdom literature and poetry. Our Old Testament includes all 24 books of the Tanakh, plus Ruth and Esther, just arranged differently to make up a total of 39 books. Proverbs in the Tanakh sits within the Ketuvim, the wisdom literature and poetry. In our Old Testament, it also sits within the wisdom books, the wisdom books being Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. Solomon contributed 3 of the 5 wisdom books, Ecclesiastes, the Song of Solomon, as well as the vast majority of the Proverbs. We know that early in Solomon's reign as king, God offered Solomon anything he wanted, and Solomon asked for wisdom. He asked for a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? And God granted his request. 1 Kings chapter 4 says in part, God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. From all nations people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. And wisdom, I believe, that Solomon gives thanks to God for by leaving us this book of Proverbs. It's a book of wisdom to shape our perceptions, values, and character into something that is consistently in tune with God, not just as a set of rules to follow, but to equip us in our daily lives by understanding and practicing God's purpose. Which leads on to the purpose of the book of Solomon. And to find the purpose, as we've already heard, you don't go any further than the first 6 verses. A classic case of say what you're going to say. And the purposes being, or I'm going to repeat this, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give to the simple, read naive, prudence, to get to the young man knowledge and discretion, to give to a wise man increased learning, and to give to the man of understanding wise counsel, all of which leads into making a person wise or wiser, and instructing how to act wisely and righteously, treat others with fairness, in order to give the ignorant common sense, the young sound advice, the wise even more wisdom. And furthermore, Proverbs 1 verse 7, which sits outside of our reading this morning, and Joseph will discuss this next week, verse 7 is fundamental to the entire book and the purpose of verses 1 to 6. And verse 7 reads this, and we heard this sung in the video we just saw this morning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. And for those words, fear of the Lord, read reverence for the Lord. And when you come to the understanding that God is, then is there any time when these words don't apply? Is there any time when reverence for or the fear of God is not the starting point to knowledge and wisdom? It's appropriate now, for clarity's sake, so that we're all rowing in the one direction, to talk about what is wisdom, and which is the third point this morning. So what is wisdom and why it's important? I think it's probably obvious, but here's an easy to understand definition of wisdom. The 20th century Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge defines wisdom as: wisdom may be defined as a realistic approach to the problems of life. And that is simple and easy to understand, isn't it? Answering both the what is and the why of wisdom, well worth remembering. But given that verse 7 is fundamental to Proverbs, though, and just repeating verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. And there's another definition that I came across that defers to verse 7 and still answers the question, what is wisdom? It needs, in my opinion, some clarification, though, in explaining the what and why of wisdom. And C.S. Lewis defines wisdom as this. He says, as I understand wisdom, therefore, it's the skill of living, because you understand the created order. And that's the end of the definition. But two key words with two key phrases. The key words being understand and because. The two key phrases separated by because, and each preceded by the word understand. Wisdom is being able to understand the skill of living because you understand the created order. And let's deal with the created order first. And still relying heavily on C.S. Lewis here, created order simply means that you know that God created this world we live in. And still paraphrasing C.S. Lewis, thank you. And here's some simple analogies. Before you can read, you must know what the alphabet is. Before you can do maths, you must understand numbers. Before you can play music, you must know the notes in the scale. So using those analogies, what do you need to know before you understand wisdom? What are the very first words of Genesis? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's what you need to know before you understand wisdom, which also allows me to quote the opening and parallel verses of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. And C.S. Lewis is simply saying that before you understand the skill of living, you must know and understand that God created all things. And this is the created order. Then you can aspire to wisdom. And that's why verse 7 is so critical to the whole pursuit of wisdom. The fear of the Lord, or reverence for the Lord, is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. And if you understand there is a created order, all stemming from and through God, then you're well on your way to wisdom, because you revere God for what he has created. And this reverence for God is the beginning of knowledge. And now the first phrase, the skill of living. Let's go back to C.S. Lewis again, and adding a bit of clarification. One kind of skill is technical, such as a carpenter building a wall. It's creating something of beauty, a garden, a painting, a wonderful meal, or ably using information technology. A second kind of skill is administrative. That is how to keep things in order, on track and under control. And the third skill is the skill of living itself. It's social skill. How to relate to people, how to talk to people, how to listen. And this doesn't happen overnight, does it? And so we have the skill of living bound together with the understanding that God made the created order. And from this understanding flows the purpose of the book of Proverbs as outlined in the first 6 verses, receiving prudence, knowledge, discretion, the art of wise counsel, the knowledge of right from wrong, and so on. In other words, through God, we receive wisdom in the skill of living. So let's now move on to the relevance for today. So in a few words, if wisdom is a skill that guides us in deciding what to do as we live life, then given that the purpose of a book of Proverbs is all about the getting of wisdom to achieve this purpose, then it's certainly relevant, isn't it? Wisdom that shapes our thoughts and actions into being consistently in tune with God, not just as a set of rules to follow, but equipping us in our daily lives by understanding and practicing God's purpose. What about relevance that's close to home, though? What about ourselves, our families, and those we're close to you? As we watch children grow up through childhood, the teenage years, and into adulthood, what do we want for them and from them? In the book of Proverbs, we're reminded about what the acceptance of a word created by God can deliver for them by simply restating the skills listed in verses 1 to 6 that are as relevant in this turbulent and unsettled world that we live in as they were some 2,100 years ago. And if you want turbulent and unsettled and also ungodly, all you've got to do is listen to or read the news every day, wherever you may get your news from. And there's a whole series of sermons in that one sentence alone. And in children, teenagers and young adults, we are seeking for them these very skills, the gaining of wisdom and instruction, the understanding of words and the gaining of insight, the receiving of instruction and knowledge of what is prudent behaviour, and in knowing what is right and just and fair. And with the coming of maturity, we trust then that the above skills that have developed can be enhanced in all of us as adults to still seek wisdom by having the wisdom to listen and add to our learning, by be discerning enough to receive guidance, and by understanding the proverbs, parables, and riddles of the wise, all underscored by reverence for God and his creation. And if the above is not relevant for today, then what is? And this is simply saying that when we leave that hopefully modest, safe harbour that we live in, that we've created for ourselves, and whatever or wherever that might be, and we've sailed to somewhere, maybe we only visit occasionally, or where we've never sailed to before, that's when the skills of life, the skills of wisdom kick in for us again. And life is consistently and constantly learning. And one more point, a point demonstrating why wisdom is the skill of living. There's a common saying that goes, Jack's as good as his master. And to emphasise the definition of wisdom as stemming from understanding God's created order, you will instinctively know why Jack's as good as his master. Because the Lord made Jack and also made his master, didn't he? It underscores the respect that Jack should have for his master and the respect the master should have for Jack. And this saying echoes Galatians chapter 3, beginning at verse 26, but moving through to verse 28, which I'm sure we all know. So in Christ Jesus, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And these verses are foreshadowed by verse 2 from chapter 22 of the book of Proverbs, which read, The rich and the poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. And some of us are Jacks or Jills. Some of us are masters or mistresses. We can often swap between being one and the other on a daily basis, depending upon what we're doing. The swapping around recognising that using the skill required in any given situation will determine whether we're the Jack, Jill, or master, mistress. Skills encompassing technical skills, organisational and control skills, and life skills. And now, if you bear with me, just going back to some personal experiences. In my work role, I had many discussions where my master, the boss, delivered to me, that is Jack, or deferred to me because of my technical skills, and I deferred to my boss because he had the control and organisational skills. We both displayed life skills in discussing calmly, well, mostly anyway, but always respectfully what we should or shouldn't do, or could or couldn't do in any given situation. There were other countless discussions with my work colleagues where also the master-jack relationship frequently reversed itself as we used our technical, administrative and life skills to put the wisdom of experience into the decisions we were making. And also through faith, mine and my boss's, there was always this underlying understanding that we were part of God's creation. And given that my technical skill was preparing and submitting tender offers for commercial building work, I always remember one tender offer I made. I insisted, much to my boss's amusement, that we change the final tender offer because it contained the numbers 666. They weren't the last three numbers. They were the second, third and fourth numbers in a 7 or 8 digit number, likely well into the tens of millions of dollars. I think my boss, using his life skills, mentally just patted me on my head, but then said yes, and we changed the offer, and 666 disappeared. We won the job. And during final tender negotiations with the client, my boss informed the client of that final change made to the tender offer. There was mutual amusement at my expense, but also understanding. The project was a Christian school building, and the client was a Christian denomination. And there was unstated acceptance of the created order. But I also understand that your life experience may be at total variance to this. The above is just my personal experience. You would have dealt with people who do not accept the basic understanding of where real wisdom comes from. But this is not an excuse to abandon your knowledge that wisdom is underscored by God's creation. Ultimately, your faith will prevail, even if it is in ways you never imagined. I resigned from one job because the organisation did not exhibit any understanding of the created order. So, now in conclusion, I began by saying what I was going to say. I believe I've said it. And now in conclusion, I'm simply saying I said what I was going to say. But summed up, though, by some more of Solomon's wisdom, reflecting on God's wisdom. It's not from the book of Proverbs, but it's Ecclesiastes, which was also written by Solomon, chapter 12, verse 11. I've used a Bible Gateway translation of a 935 BC farming technology changed into 21st century AD English. And Solomon writes, "From God, wise words ring true in our ears, whether we want to hear them or not. They prod us, convict us, and move us, and heeding them strengthens us." So God bless and Amen. Thank you.